Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a world that most of us have only seen through a romantic lens. We're diving into Richard Henry Dana Jr.'s incredible 1840 memoir, 2 years before the mast. And let me tell you, this isn't some swashbuckling adventure. It is an absolutely unflinching look at the life of a common sailor. A story that just rips away that beautiful fantasy of life at sea to show you what it really was, a living hell.
You know, back in the 1830s, this was the dream. You can just picture it, right? Longfellow's words captured it perfectly. The sea was this place of adventure, of profound mystery, of magic. And that vision was a powerful siren song. It called out to young men all over New England, promising them an escape, a chance to see the world, to find freedom. It promised them a life that was anything but ordinary.
Yeah, about that. For the guys who actually had to work on those ships, the men who lived before the mast, down in the dark, wet, cramped forecastle, that magic was a cruel joke. The reality wasn't some grand adventure. It was a brutal, mind-numbing, soul-crushing nightmare. Your life was governed by the whims of a tyrant, and the only thing that mattered was the ship. So, in this first section, let's meet the man who shattered that romantic lie for everyone. We're going to find out who he was, and more importantly, how in the world someone like him ended up on a common merchant ship. The contrast between the life he left and the one he walked into, it's just shocking.
So who is our narrator? I mean, Richard Henry Dana Jr. was about as far from a typical sailor as you could get. This was a Harvard kid from a very well-known Boston family. But his life took a sharp turn when a case of measles wrecked his eyesight, so bad he couldn't even read. So what's his cure? A radical one. He signs up for a 2-year voyage as a common sailor, thinking the hard labor would somehow fix him. It's an absolutely wild decision. He knew nothing, a total green hand, just walking into this completely alien world.
And this right here, this shows you the total transformation. It's night and day. Dana himself talks about how jarring it was. One minute he's in the tight frock coat, silk cap, and kid gloves of a student. The next, he's thrown into the sailor's uniform, loose duck trousers, a check shirt, and a tarpaulin hat. And you have to understand, this wasn't just changing his outfit. It was like he was shedding his entire identity. His social class, his education, everything he was, it was gone. He wasn't a Harvard man anymore. He was just another pair of hands.
And in this brutal new world, there's only one person who matters. Only one person with absolute authority. One man who literally holds the power of life, death, and daily misery right in the palm of his hand. The ship's captain. And his name was Captain Frank Thompson. He was the master of the brig Pilgrim. As Dana puts it, this was a man who would flog his crew for the tiniest thing and do it brutally. Guys like Thompson, they operated with complete and total impunity. See, the second that ship is out of sight of land, the captain's word is God's word. There is no court, there is no appeal. The ship is his kingdom, and he could be as cruel a king as he wanted to be.
There was this saying among the sailors, and it tells you everything you need to know about the moral black hole these ships became. A man must leave his conscience at Cape Horn. It basically meant that all the normal rules of society, of right and wrong, of basic human decency, they just didn't apply out there. It was this isolated, violent bubble where just surviving meant you had to accept or even be a part of things you'd find absolutely horrifying back on shore.
So it's in this totally lawless world that Dana sees something so awful, so horrific, it was literally burned into his memory forever. This is the moment where the captain's everyday cruelty just explodes into this unforgettable display of pure, raw sadism.
It all starts over something small. A sailor named Sam gets called out for some minor mistake, something that wasn't even a big deal. But Captain Thompson orders him to be seized and tied up for a flogging. The entire crew is just watching, completely stunned. But then, something happens that nobody could have predicted. Another sailor, a Swede named John, actually dares to speak up.
I mean, can you even imagine the guts it took to say that? To question the captain, the absolute authority on the ship, in front of everybody? It was unthinkable. It was a stunning act of defiance. And it took the captain's anger and turned it into a white-hot rage.
Thompson, just furious that he's been challenged, immediately turns on John. He orders him seized and tied up right next to Sam. And as he's standing there in front of these two helpless men, he gives a speech. And it's not about discipline. Oh no, it's about a terrifying, chilling truth. He tells them exactly why he's about to beat them. Chilling, isn't it? This had nothing to do with keeping order. It wasn't about punishment.
The captain screams it for the whole crew to hear. This was about his own sick pleasure. It was about power. Pure, absolute power, fueled by cruelty just for the sake of being cruel. So, the flogging starts. The rope whip just tears into Sam's back, and the agony is too much. He does what anyone would do. He cries out for help, for salvation, calling on the only name he can think of. He screams, "Oh Jesus Christ! Oh Jesus Christ!"
And right there, that's the moment this whole scene goes from just brutal to truly monstrous. The captain screams back at him, telling him that God has no power here, that on this ship, in this floating world of wood and water, there is only one God, and his name is Frank Thompson. It is the ultimate expression of tyranny, a man declaring himself the only one who can decide who suffers and who is saved.
After the sharp, vivid horror of that flogging, Dana's life just settled into a different kind of pain. It wasn't the sharp agony of the whip anymore. It was the chronic, grinding, day-in, day-out misery of the labor they had to do on the coast of California.
So what was all this for? Why were they even there? It was all about something the sailors called California banknotes. And what they were talking about was cowhides. See, this is the 1830s, way before the gold rush. The entire California economy was built on the trade of hides and tallow. Dana's ship was just one small part of this massive supply chain, collecting raw hides to feed the leather factories back in New England.
And the work itself, this hide dragging, was just brutal. First, they'd cure the hides on the beach. Then the sailors had to carry these stiff, heavy hides, weighing 50 pounds apiece, on their heads down these crumbling, dangerous cliffs. Then they'd have to wade out into the bone-chilling Pacific surf, trying to balance these things to keep them dry. And finally, they'd row them for miles out to the ship. It was just repetitive, dangerous, back-breaking work, day after day after day.
So how many hides are we talking about here? By the time they were done, the crew of Dana's ship had collected and loaded 40,000 hides. Just try to wrap your head around that number. 40,000. Imagine the sheer scale of that labor. 40,000 times carrying that weight, 40,000 times wading into that freezing water. It was a task that must have felt like it would literally never, ever end.
And that brings us to our last section. After all of that, the violence, the endless toil, what was the lasting impact? What were the psychological scars? Well, Dana gives us this really profound insight into what was left behind. Here's one of the most interesting things he writes. After that horrific flogging, the men, they almost never talked about it. In the cramped forecastle where they all lived on top of each other, where there were no secrets, this one terrible event was just buried. It was like they all made this unspoken pact to pretend it never happened. So why? Why wouldn't you talk about the most dramatic, terrifying thing that you all went through together? Well, think about it. To talk about it would be to relive the humiliation. It would be a constant reminder that they were completely and utterly powerless against the captain's tyranny. That silence was a survival mechanism. It was a way to endure a trauma they couldn't fight and they couldn't escape. But Dana refused to stay silent. When he finally got home, his health and his sight both restored, he wrote this book. And 2 years before the Mast was a bombshell. It became an instant sensation. For the very first time, the public saw the ugly, unvarnished truth about a sailor's life. It sparked a massive public outcry, and it led directly to reforms in maritime law to protect sailors from exactly the kind of abuse he wrote about. He became a voice for all of those men who have been forced into silence. And the final irony, for one of the most influential American books of the 19th century, his publisher paid him just $250. You know, Dana's book is an incredible historical record, but it leaves us with this timeless and I think deeply unsettling question. If absolute power really does corrupt absolutely, what kind of darkness does it unleash in a person when they're miles from shore, with no witnesses and no one to answer to but themselves?